Glory to God in the highest, and on earth, peace to people of goodwill. A relatively quick and impromptu video I want to make here. I'm going to do this sort of on the fly. I want to show another example of a pattern that seems to come up on the internet quite a bit, where someone will make some rather extraordinary or even explosive claims and present them as a challenge. And yet when one attempts to discuss it in more detail with them, the person will feign offense and begin to misdirect from the original topic. And so in this case, the example I'm going to provide is from this thread in the Biblical Rumble Room forum on Facebook. And it's a thread that was started by someone with the screen name Sahil Moshe, right? And so let's read through his post. He says, "Let the science speak. E1B1A. When it comes to who's genetically closest to the ancient Israelites, the data is crystal clear, and it's not who most people assume. Based on studies using PCA admixture and FST analysis, here's the breakdown. Lemba are closest among modern populations. African Americans with E1B1A are very close. Natufians, Levantine ancestors, are strongly connected. Ashkenazi Jews, farthest, with significant European admixture. This isn't guesswork. These are peer-reviewed genetic studies from Nature, Science, Tel Aviv University, American Journal of Human Genetics. And yes, ancient DNA does exist, and it's breaking the gates wide open. They say, you're just making it up. We say, read the sources. See the full chart below, here, with sources." And then he gives this chart. And if we don't include the top row, which is the row with the titles of the different columns, we'll put Iron Age Israelites as the first row, and you see that it says that this is the baseline. So they're using some sort of Iron Age Israelite sample or multiple Iron Age Israelite samples as a baseline, and this is based on some studies, or maybe one study or multiple studies by Lazaridis and others, right? And then in the second row, if you look in the right column, they're listed as very close to that baseline with a distance of 0.02. Then in the third row, the Lemba, right, are listed as close, right, with a distance of 0.03. Then African Americans with E1B1A are listed as close with a distance of 0.04 to 0.05. And then at the bottom, the final row, skipping over the previous row, which has Sephardic Jews, at the bottom row you have Ashkenazi Jews, and they're given a distance of over 0.07. Now, recall that the post had invited people to read the sources, and then it says that the sources are cited in this chart. However, if you look closely at this, notice, for example, the row for African Americans. This is the third row from the bottom. The source cited just reads Tishkoff, Shore, others, 2009 to 2020. So that's an 11-year range, and it's unclear if this is one study or multiple studies. There's no titles given. Simply put, it's rather vague and unclear what's being referred to. And so, too, when you look at the very bottom row for Ashkenazi Jews, it's Behar et al., then Ostra, El Hayek, Nature, +1. But again, no titles, no years. It's a little difficult to discern what precise sources are being referenced here. And so it seemed the appropriate thing to do would be to ask for clarification. And so that's what I did. My initial comment came 2 days after the thread went up. The thread went up on July 30th of this year, and my initial comment was posted on August 1st. And this is what I wrote. I said quite a lot of comments in this thread. Forgive me if my comment misses something already touched on. In the image at the start of the thread, there's a line which reads, quote, Iron Age Israelites, Lazaridis, Skurtaniotti, Finkelstein, Tel Aviv University. Did anyone share the precise source and what was or were the samples employed as the, quote, Iron Age Israelite standard? And then I move on. I note that the next line in the chart reads, quote, Natufians, Lazaridis et al., Nature 2016. And then I write, just so we have everything lined up, that would be this source, correct? And then I link to an article titled Genomic Insights into the Origin of Farming in the Ancient Near East, right? And I provide the link, right? Then after that, I write the next line in the chart reads, Lemba, Thomas et al., AGHG 2000. And I write, that would be this article from the American Journal of Human Genetics, correct? And there's the article title in the link. The article title is Y Chromosomes Traveling South, the Cohen Modal Haplotype and the Origins of the Lemba, the Black Jews of Southern Africa, right? And then I write this, because I have looked at that study. I'm pretty sure that's the study being referenced. I said, if so, could you clarify which part precisely in that article is being referenced to arrive at that figure for your proximity of Lemba to Iron Age Israelites? And then I proceed from there. I say the next line in the chart reads, quote, African Americans E1B1A, Tishkoff, Schur, others, 2009 to 2020, end quote. And then my comment is, with that long range of years, are multiple studies being referenced? If so, could you cite the relevant studies in a bit more detail? For example, at least the titles and links if possible. And could you share what precisely is stated in which study regarding the proximity of African Americans to Iron Age Israelites? Then I proceed. I say the next line in the chart reads, quote, Ashkenazi Jews, Behar et al., Osterl, El Hayek, Nature, +1. And my comment is, again, is this referring to one study or multiple studies? Can we get the titles, the links, if possible, and what precisely was said regarding the proximity of Ashkenazim to Iron Age Israelites? The inclusion of El Hayek is particularly interesting as his platform seems to tell a more complex story, i.e., while both Ashkenazim and African Americans both constitute diverse spectra, Ashkenazim scoring better on his platform relative to ancient samples seems fairly common. That was back on August 1st. So I never got a response to that, right? 3 weeks passed, and then on August 21st, I leave another comment. I see, circling back to this comment nearly 3 weeks later, Sahil, I wanted to ask if you might clarify the precise sources cited above, mentioned above. Also, this is a follow-up question, did you put that chart together yourself, or was it put together by someone else? Might it have been put together in ChatGPT? And if, emphasis on if it was put together in ChatGPT, might you be willing to share a link to the full correspondence from which the chart was taken, right? These seem to me like fair questions. They're clarifying questions, right? So this time, after that second comment, Sahil responded, and he said, are you referring to the genetic studies that were published? So I respond to him. I say, yes, Sahil. In my first comment above, I asked you to clarify a few of those references. In my second comment, I also asked you if you yourself put that chart together or if it was put together by ChatGPT or some other person/source. Then I added that if, emphasis on if, the chart was compiled by ChatGPT, I would like to ask if you might be willing to share the link to the full correspondence, right? And so Sahil responded. He said, everything on that chart comes directly from peer-reviewed studies. The sources are already listed, so they can be looked up. Hope that helps. And you notice there's no attempted clarification, right? But nonetheless, I responded just to clarify. I said, Sahil, I'm asking two main things. First, I'm asking you to clarify certain sources alluded to in your post. And then I go through examples, like, for example, the Iron Age Israelites samples. What samples were they? I ask if it's correct that this is the article from Thomas. I'm pretty confident that's the article being referenced. But nonetheless, for the Lemba, if this is the article being referenced. And then I ask him, because I did look in that article and I didn't find what justifies the conclusion of the chart. Then from there, again, I ask about, this vague reference that spans 11 years and what precise sources are being referenced. And then aside from that, a second thing I noted is that I'm also asking if you put this chart together or if someone else put that chart together. Moreover, I was wondering if perhaps the chart was compiled by ChatGPT. If so, would you be willing to share a link to the full correspondence, right? And a week passed without, more than a week to be honest, without any sort of reply. And so on August 31st, I left another comment and I said, returning to this thread 1 week after my most recent comment and more than 4 weeks after my first comment, Sahil, permit me to note that I remain interested in a clarification on the precise sources being alluded to, perhaps more specifically what precisely is stated in relevant portions therein and the origin of the chart itself. Like, for example, was it put together by ChatGPT? If so, can we see the full thread which led to that chart? And again, I didn't get a response, but just today, I saw that he was commenting in the thread elsewhere. He was commenting in other sub-threads within the thread, right? So seeing that he was, active in the thread again, I put, Sahil, please forgive the repetition, but seeing that this morning you have returned to this thread, I wanted to redraw your attention to this specific sub-thread to share that I remain interested in your replies to the questions immediately above regarding clarification of some of the sources alluded to and who compiled that chart. For example, was it you? Was it ChatGPT or someone or something else? And since then, there was some subsequent discussion and another gentleman repeated my request. He said, post the individual studies. That's all that was requested. Sahil responded, I provided the link. So where's the confusion? I'm not understanding why there's this much level of scrutiny of peer-reviewed studies. And so I was a bit incredulous. I quoted him stating that he provided the links, and I said, are you saying you posted links to all the studies referenced in your chart? For example, the links to studies alluded to by Tishkoff, sure, others, as well as the links to the studies alluded to by Behar et al., Ostra, El Hayek, Nature +1. If so, I must have missed that. Where might those links be found? Can you repost them here? Then later on, someone else had asked what precisely we're asking for. This is Tazara, who was tagged in by Sahil. He says, let me get this straight. You guys are asking him for the studies referenced in the screenshot. So once again, I go over everything. I said I was asking two things. I was asking for clarification on certain citations in the chart at the start of the thread. And I was asking if he made the chart, or perhaps if it was put together by ChatGPT. And if it was put together by ChatGPT, if he'd be willing to share the link to the full correspondence, right? Just repeating, going through this, and then I go through the precise studies that I'm interested in, the precise citations. So Sahil responds. He says, the chart I posted already cites peer-reviewed studies, Lazaridis, Nature, Thomas, Tishkoff, Behar, Oster, El Hayek. These are the same references geneticists use in universities and academic papers, and let's be real, the issue here isn't whether the sources exist. They do. It's that you don't like the results. Bottom line, stop pretending this is about missing links. If you think the chart is wrong, bring a study that contradicts Lazaridis, Tishkoff, or Thomas. The point isn't whether I hand you clickable links. The point is the studies exist. They're mainstream, peer-reviewed science. They confirm exactly what the chart shows. If you want to double-check, you can search the titles like anyone else who's serious about the subject. That's how scholarship works. And then he puts 100 emojis. And, basically at this point, with all due respect, this is a wild goose chase. He's basically, this is the standard sort of thing you hear on the internet of like, do your own research, right? He said he shared all the links, but then when I asked him if he could repost those links, he's saying it doesn't matter if I posted the links or not. You can go find them yourself. But elsewhere in the thread, another contributor who perhaps is a bit less charitable with his language left this comment. He said, this looks so fake and was obviously created by a scammer. And then he leaves some other comments. And, then a bit of a flame war is erupting between the two of them. And so I offered this comment. And attempting to be a little bit more charitable with my language, I say and this is honestly where I'm at with this, I said, after a month of asking for clarification without getting any, I will politely say that it arouses suspicion. The post at the start of the thread is at best curious and at worst potentially ironic. And the reason why I say it's potentially ironic is because he's telling people to read the sources, yet what precise sources he's referencing remains unclear, right? And so there's a bit of irony there that he's challenging us to check out these sources, and yet he's unclear as to which sources he has in mind, right? So it feels a little bit like a wild goose chase, and I don't know, and that feels ironic. So I guess leaving that comment offended him. He writes to me, he says, LMAO, laughing my backside off, a month of asking and you still haven't cracked open a single source? That's not scholarship. That's stalling. So, for a month I've been asking him to clarify his sources and he's accusing me of stalling. Okay. He said, what's really suspicious is how you only pull the fraud card when black people cite genetics, but stay silent when Europeans use the same studies. This to me seems like the equivalent of saying, don't look here, look over there, right? Stop focusing on on my post, focus on some Europeans' post, right? It seems like an obvious attempt at misdirection, right? And he says, let's be real. You don't have a counter argument, so you hide behind vague words like curious and ironic. That's not research, that's deflection. Suspicion isn't evidence. Either produce sources that disprove Lazaridis, Tishkov, and Thomas, or stop wasting everyone's time with your fake polite gatekeeping. The same dude you're going to bat for says blacks are not from Noah and laughs and mocks about slavery. Again, this is misdirection. He's basically inviting me to stop worrying about his study and get into something someone else in the chat, has said elsewhere, right? And I'm not endorsing, just for the record, I'm not endorsing some crazy claim like, quote unquote, blacks are not from Noah, right? For the record, I would say among the very vast and diverse population that people would popularly referred to as quote-unquote black, there are descendants of Japhet and descendants of Shem and descendants of Ham, descendants of all three of Noah's sons within that very diverse spectrum. So I'm not endorsing anything like that, but it's not even worth really responding to because it's misdirection. It's drawing attention away from the topic of the post, which was these studies that allegedly justify the numbers that are given in that chart. And then he adds, he says, you've had over a month to prove the study's wrong, and you haven't, and that is suspect. And, this is a tad awkward because I haven't even cast aspersions on the studies. Like, before we can even agree or disagree or assess in any way what was said in those studies, we need to first know what studies we're referring to and what precisely was said, right? We haven't even got off the ground with that basic point, and already we have the misdirection and, the feigning of offense, and it's suspicious. I was already suspicious, but my suspicion increases. And then he leaves another comment in which he tags a person named Tazara, who often wants to disrupt discussions by declaring that I'm biased. Like, stop this argument. Let's talk instead about how you're biased. And he says, I see what you mean about him now, shaking my head. And so, from there, I proceeded to just clarify that I'm merely trying to track down these sources. And you can read through this if you want, and I'll also provide a link to the full thread. But basically, the point of this video is just to show that this is one more example of a familiar pattern on the internet where someone will make an extraordinary claim. And then when you attempt to dig into the claim with them, have just a straightforward academic discussion, they feign offense, they engage in misdirection, and they pull this sort of like do your own research card, right? Which is a wild goose chase. And just to be clear, this sort of game is not limited to any particular ideological group, right? This is across the spectrum. People do this, right? Even in secular settings, religious settings, whatever. There are all sorts of people making extraordinary claims. And then when you try to discuss it with them, they basically, they're offended, they want to impugn your intentions, and they want to tell you to go do your own research, right? And you should always be suspicious when people take that turn merely in reaction to being asked for clarification on their claims, right? That's all. Just wanted to show this. Like I said, I'll link to the full thread in the description, but this seemed worth documenting to me. All right, I'll have more substantive videos in the near future, God willing, hopefully get back to some linguistic topics. But until then, please feel free to leave any comments, whether positive or negative, and God bless.